Welcome back. I'm Pastor Brooke Simpson, and I'm going to be taking you through what we as a church are going through with an organization called the Unstuck group. And if you'll recall, this will be the fourth of 5 videos. Here's where we've been so far. We did an overall overview of the Unstuck process. That was video number 1. The second video was we took a look at where we were at, answered the question, where are we currently? Analyzed all sorts of data, and we determined that, you know what, we're in a maintenance phase. We're overly complex, there's communication gaps, there's inefficiencies, and you're experiencing that as a congregation. You see many, if not all, of the problems at Grace Community Church organizationally. So then we talked about the third video, which was where are we headed? And that was strategically the planning. We looked at the vision, the alignment pyramid, and we're only halfway up the pyramid, but we're moving in that direction. Today, we're going to talk about structure. The structure question answers this question, and that is, who's going to do what? So if assessment answers the question, where are we at? Planning answers the question, where are we going to go? And how are we going to get there? This question, structure, answers the question, okay, who's going to be responsible to do what as we move forward? So that's what we're going to take a look at today. Grace Community Church is what we call an elder-led church. Let me read from you from 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 8. This is the Apostle Peter speaking to the churches. Now listen carefully what he says about how to lead a church. He says, "So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that's going to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility towards one another. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble." That's a wonderful passage, and it gives us a glimpse into the New Testament understanding of how a church, a local church, should be led. Paul said in Titus chapter 1, verse 5, he speaks to Titus and he says, "Appoint what I left you in order. Appoint elders, plural, in every city." So the Bible teaches that an elder is a leader who gives oversight, and they shepherd the flock. Now that word shepherd, it's translated pastor. So an elder is a pastor is an elder. And here at Grace Community Church, we have a plurality of elders, leaders who shepherd the flock. So that's the biblical prescription. That's the model for how a church should be led. But that said, it gives very, very little detail about how those elders or how that church should actually be structured. We know what an elder does, we know what a pastor does, and we know without question what the characteristics and qualities of an elder should be. Mostly have to do with character, and they have to have one skill, and that skill is they have to have the ability to teach. But other than that, the Bible's very unclear. What is clear is the content. The content is the gospel. The form and the structure of church governance tends to be the wineskin. And what we have learned is that our current wineskin is leaking, and wine or the gospel is being spilled out. You see, I was reading a paper by Austin Stone on eldership. The Austin Stone, it's a church in Texas, and they have a very, very large church. They have a lot of elders, and they have a great, great paper on what elders are and how they function as a team. And they said, looking at that plurality of elders, which is the biblical model, which is the prescription that we're supposed to follow, there's 3 different ways that churches pretty much screw that up. First of all is the pastor is king model. That's one structure, and many churches follow it. This pastor has all authority. He tends to be overbearing, or certainly can become overbearing, and everyone submits to him as an individual. Think Protestant Pope. That's not what we have, but there are many churches that do that. There's a second way that you can deviate from the plurality of elders model, and that you call it the leader of minions. This is one pastor who has quote unquote elders, but they all submit to him. Tends to not lend itself to accountability, and in a sense it's the pastor is king model, but it has an elder board. The third model is what they call the headless giant. Now follow along here. Here's what the headless giant is. The headless giant is passionately committed to the idea of a plurality of eldership. And that's a good thing. But everyone is working diligently to enact a democratic process in which everyone pretends that everyone has the same gifting, the same influence, and the same voice. And instead of being characterized by authoritative leadership, it's characterized by anarchy. Nothing actually gets done. And actually, because all of these elders are weighing in on every little decision, it leads to a paralysis of leadership. It leads to siloing, where different teams are doing different things, and it leads to a variety of different visions which might actually be competing in the same church. How many of you ever experienced this? You've talked to this elder, and then you talk to the second elder, or maybe the third elder, and you've gotten three different visions for where they think the church should go. That's the headless giant. That's Grace Community Church. So we worked with the Unstuck group, and we took a look at our current structure, and they gave us some recommendations. To embrace a plurality of elders, we're not changing our polity in terms of who we are as a church and what we believe about what an elder is, but to understand that how you organize as an elder is part, you remember the pyramid? You have beliefs, you have mission, and you have vision, and then you have goals, and then you have strategy. Now, Grace Community Church in the past has put structure down with beliefs. But here's the problem with that. Structure is a function of strategy. So we need to be mobile, we need to change, and we need to adapt so that we can continue to transport the gospel without spilling it all over the floor. Here's what the Unstuck group has recommended. The church will still be led by elders. The church will still be led by elders. Actually, the church is led by Jesus. So let's start with the head of the church, which is Jesus. The church will have an elder board, which will be consisting of 6 to 8 laymen, not paid staff elders, which we still have, and I am one of those elders. But we will have an elder board consisting of laymen who oversee the larger scope of Grace Community Church. We're talking about protecting the doctrine, protecting the mission, protecting the vision. They're forward thinking. They're looking out over where we're headed. They're not in the day-to-day operations, but they're just overseeing where Grace is headed. They'll oversee major financial considerations. They will see to it that the lead pastor is held accountable. So that's their role. That's their role. Of course, I mentioned that, but in this structure, there is a lead pastor. This is not a pastor as king model. This is not a pastor or a leader of minions where individuals report to him, but rather this is a model where there is a lead pastor or elder who is full-time, who is vocational. The lead pastor is responsible for overseeing the majority of the teaching and for casting the vision. They don't come up with a vision all by themselves, that they're probably the loudest voice in articulating and clarifying and communicating that vision so that the church is headed in the right direction. Now that lead pastor is accountable to the elder board. Now the elders have determined that I'm going to be that lead pastor, so my role hasn't changed all that much, except that I've taken on some responsibilities that maybe in the past I have not. Now, from here on out, there's the rest of the organization, and we're still in process of determining how that's going to look. So I'm not going to draw out the org chart because we don't have one yet. Here's kind of a metaphor that might help you understand what we're doing here. If I were to draw a little bus, forgive the crude drawing and the illustration, but before the Unstuck process, all of our staff and all the elders were on this bus. As we're going through this, we assessed where we're at. Where are we at? Well, we're kind of slowing down. We're in maintenance phase. Where do we want to go? We want to go here, we want to see 1,000 people come to Christ in 5 years. And here's the structures and the strategies that need to happen. Then we answer the question, structurally, well, who needs to do what? So here's where we're at. Okay, everybody get out of the bus. So everyone is exiting the bus. We're all standing on the side of the road. And now we're saying, who needs to do what in this vehicle to get to said destination? So we're kind of halfway through the process in terms of people getting back on the bus to determine who needs to do what so we can go the next few miles. So that's where we're at. Again, as I'm giving you updates, you need to understand as a church that this is not a finished product. This is a destination. This is where we're headed. But we want to give you insight as a congregation so that you can pray. So how do you pray? You can pray that God would speak specifically to our hearts as elders, as pastors, and you can pray that God would continue to humble us, because one of the most important things that Peter said when he said, I exhort you to shepherd the flock among you, is that he said, you've got to do that with humility. Because once a person becomes proud, or once an organization becomes proud, they are set up to endure a fall. And so pray that we would be humble, that we would efface ourselves, and we would place ourselves at the mercy of God to ask Him to give us wisdom so that we might lead the church and shepherd the church well, so that you as disciples might be equipped to be all that God calls you to be. So tune in next week when we will look at the final phase of the Unstuck process and talk about action.